I had the opportunity back in November, actually, to interview Zohran Mamdani. This was on Breaking Points with Ryan Grimm. I believe Ryan set the interview up, and nobody had any idea who Zohran Mamdani was. He was like a Democratic Socialist of America, assemblyman in New York State, and was very obviously from that wing of the broader left, of the progressive movement. So not a whole lot for Zoran and me to even debate, but I found him really interesting and could tell that he was pretty talented, like just in a political sense, pretty talented. So I'm obviously surprised by what happened last night. Everybody's surprised that he beat Andrew Cuomo in the first round with a pretty healthy margin. The polling didn't show that happening, but I actually think that this is an interesting story for reasons that don't have anything to do purely with the politics, and go sort of deeper into our culture. And I want to start actually with this post on X, where it says, "To understand Zoran, you must understand this," and refers to an email that Peter Thiel sent to the Facebook team. And this is, some real big names on this email chain. Mark Zuckerberg, Nick Clegg, Sheryl Sandberg, Mark Andreessen are on this. It's sent January 5th, 2020. And Thiel goes on to say, "I certainly would not suggest that our policy should be to embrace millennial attitudes unreflexively." Could not agree more, Peter. "I would be the last person to advocate for socialism, but when 70% of millennials say they are pro-socialist, we need to do better than simply dismiss them by saying that they are stupid or entitled or brainwashed. We should try to understand why. And from the perspective of a broken generational compact," I'm reading this whole thing because I think it's really relevant here, "there seems to be a pretty straightforward answer to me, namely that when one has too much student debt or if housing is too unaffordable, then one will have negative capital for a long time and or find it very hard to start accumulating capital in the form of real estate. And if one has no stake in the capitalist system, then one may well turn against it." Very well said, very salient, I think, even though this was written in 2020 by Peter Thiel. Obviously, Peter Thiel is a Republican donor, brilliant libertarian thinker, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, and part of the most powerful group of founders in Silicon Valley and has been for many years. So this is an interesting assessment from him. And I do think it's relevant to Mamdani. I would even extend it to say, when he points out that people find it very hard to start accumulating capital in the form of real estate, think about that actually just in a local context in New York City. You've lived in New York City, you love New York City, you are 30 years old, you're 32 like I am, and you look at your life and have basically no hope of ownership in the city, period. Like, you'll have to definitely go out of the city into greater New York. You'll have to go to New Jersey. You'll have to figure out, or you'll rent for life, right? And part of, I think, what makes a lot of small town America work, and Thomas Jefferson understood this, but part of what makes America work for sure is that so many people own physical stakes in their immediate local surroundings. This is even more important as everything becomes digital, as so much of our lives are we put so much of them we export them into the virtual world. And we lose our physical investments. And I'm not talking just about financial investments, although obviously home ownership and property, all of those things are financial investments. And people have rented for years and years in New York City, as long as New York City has been New York City. There's no question about that. But ownership is really important. And it makes you feel like you have a stake in a community, makes you feel like you have a stake in a building, a stake in a neighborhood. Maybe you own a small business. Maybe you, work in an office building. This is something so small, speaking of non-financial investments, that has such big ripple effects. You work in an office building where the doorman lives down the street from you, and you are going to lunch from 12 to 1 with your other friends who work in the building. Maybe you meet your spouse that way. I mean, all of these things are what happens when we invest physically in the world around us. And I wanted to make that point in the context of what Peter Thiel said, since it's going viral here now, but also just if you are, again, somebody who voted for Zohran Mamdani. Take a look at what Rod Dreher posted on his Substack. It's Rod Dreher's diary. If you're interested, it's a very interesting subscribe. But he posted this. Left-wing voters in New York City, like their MAGA peers nationally 9 years ago, lashed out against what they regard as a failed liberal establishment electing a charismatic populist who promised a clear break with the past. We on the right can shake our heads and laugh at how dumb New York liberals and progressives were to choose a candidate as politically inexperienced and radical as Mamdani is, but don't miss that this was also a referendum on the Democratic Party itself and the party's style of politics. And you may be thinking, that's apples and oranges. Maybe you're a Trump supporter and you say, that's apples and oranges. Donald Trump had decades of real estate experience, business at the highest level, politics at the highest level. For example, when he was saying he knew the system, so he alone could fix the system. Zoran Mamdani obviously does not have decades of experience. He's 33 years old, I believe. And, doesn't have anything near even a decades of a real estate career, let alone a political career or a business career or a career somewhere, long career somewhere else that would allow him to bring a lot of experience into City Hall. I mean, I think the point about his experience is entirely legitimate, and it'll be litigated throughout the rest of the campaign. But in the sense that Zohran Mamdani is a person, a candidate that is carrying the baggage of his voters' anger, frustration, desperation, and that last word is really critical, particularly their desperation. That's apples to apples with Donald Trump. And I want to say that with the caveat that it's actually because so many people disagree with whether you're Mamdani or Donald Trump that it's apples to apples, right? There are people who voted for Zohran Mamdani who do not want democratic socialism. They absolutely want nothing to do with it. They don't think that it's a good idea, but they heard him talking about housing being cheaper, and they were like, well, that's better than the elderly gentleman with nipple rings who is telling me that it's not even hot out, it's 100 degrees outside, and represents the failed establishment that, again, was like openly, flagrantly lying about the President of the United States' health. All of these, Andrew Cuomo is just a great proxy. He's like a mascot for the establishment wing of the Democratic Party. And so when you put someone like that, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Andrew Cuomo, with a populist who is charismatic, who's a talented politician, and who is, like Trump did again in 2015 and 2016, hammering kitchen table economic issues over and over again, that makes a huge difference. People are really desperate, and that's not a good sign. It's not a good sign that people are desperate, and we have to hope that they find political solutions that help their problems. But if you have friends that live in New York City, if you yourself live in New York City or have ever lived in New York City, you know that the American dream is dead for the vast majority of people in New York City. I mean, you can redefine it to, maybe the minuscule level of success, but like you can't own, for the most part, you cannot own a home, own a spacious apartment enough to raise a family in. My goodness, if you watched the horrible new Alec Baldwin reality show, you saw what they lived in. And that's Alec Baldwin. So maybe that's by choice, actually. Maybe he just has terrible taste, and Ilaria isn't actually as good at interior decorating as her European aura would suggest. But all that is to say, people are being pushed to the brink, and they on the left and the right, and the establishment is not responsive to their concerns. I would argue the Republican Party's establishment has been forced to be responsive to their concerns. But I really just wanted to point out that I think this is much better framing. And if you take a look at this, someone crunched the numbers. This is political data journalist Owen Winter. It's actually a bit more mixed than this makes out, referring to this. I think this is from the New York Times or the Washington Post. Medium income. It showed Cuomo voters. Cuomo was up plus 19 with people under 50K. Mamdani was up plus 6 with 50K to 100K. And then over 100K, Mamdani was up plus 13. So a lot of people are saying he's a champagne socialist. Obviously, he has a pretty privileged background. But if you look at the numbers here, it is a little bit more mixed. Cuomo's coalition, as Winter says, is of the very poorest and the very richest. And that's just Gotham to me. That is a man who is running for Gotham, who is running to keep Gotham Gotham. That should be Andrew Cuomo's campaign slogan. It is for the very, very rich and for the very, very poor. So keep the poor, on these measly handouts, meager handouts, maintain this net of meager dependency, and then continue to let the rich be rich and hire private security. It's just right out of Batman. And I wanted to make that point. Now, and by the way, I wanted to make that point because I hate saying this, but like I am a millennial. It's just like it feels dirty coming out of my mouth. I'm a millennial, but in all seriousness, I think there's a narrative that's pinging around about Mamdani that's not going to be helpful for the right. That he's just a sort of simple champagne socialist, when in fact he's somebody who I think has done the reading. He kind of knows how to campaign, whether you think it's cynical or not. He understands his voter base. He did in the primary. I mean, we're going to see now that he goes into the general. But I think he's savvy, and I think his voters are sad and desperate and deserve better. So I hope someone can offer them better than socialism.